Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Donald Trump did this long-form sit-down interview with NBC, and it was mostly just regular Trump stuff, kind of avoiding questions and doing his whole salesmanship thing. And he was asked about Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan has been lightly criticizing him, sort of both sides type criticizing him recently. But this journalist brought it up anyway and said, even the quote about the Gestapo, like on one hand, you know, people voted for this or whatever, but on the other hand, the behavior is kind of Gestapo-ish, and what do you have to say about that? He was one of your main supporters, etc. So here, real quick, is what Donald Trump had to say about that, and then I'll give some more context about what's going on with Joe Rogan because of all this Epstein file stuff.
Joe Rogan was one of your biggest endorsers in 2024. He said he understands that the president's sort of plan to deport people here who are here illegally, but he also understands why critics compare ICE officers to the Gestapo asking people for their papers. What's your response to him?
Well, look, first of all, he's a great guy. We had a tremendous success before the election. I think it was his biggest interview ever, and over 300 million people. It was very good. She didn't want to do it, you know. She decided not to do it because she's not capable. But I spoke to him 3 days ago. We had a great conversation. And all I'm doing, I have to keep...
Did he mention this to you? Did you guys talk about this, the ICE enforcement?
Yeah. Just had a good conversation. I think he's a great guy, and I think he likes me too.
Yeah.
And, you know, liking me isn't important. What happens is that I think we do a phenomenal job, but I don't think we're good at public relations.
What does that mean? You've said that a couple times now. What do you mean by that?
We don't sell the great job that we're doing.
Interesting quote from Trump there, saying, I called him the other day, we talked, and, you know, I like him, I think he likes me. Didn't answer the question at all. They did get more into the stuff about ICE, and that's where Trump said, look, it shouldn't have happened, and it was bad, and we got to support law enforcement. And so they're kind of on the back foot on that a little bit, and he has to try to come off that way in this interview because they realized they fucked up by immediately coming out calling these people terrorists and stuff. That just didn't stick. Even their own base was not having that. But on this thing with Joe Rogan, he kind of just goes, well, he likes me, so it's fine, and kind of moves on from that. It's similar, honestly, to how he handles when people bring up Zohran Mamdani to him, where he's just like, well, we're friends, so we're buddies. But given all this Epstein stuff going on, and the fact that Joe Rogan, while not directly implicated in anything in the Epstein files, never had any correspondence with Epstein, what has been made clear by this dump is that a lot of the associates of Jeffrey Epstein, and in some ways the sort of network of intellectuals and pseudo-intellectuals that he was trying to put together for very political reasons, was kind of in the circuit on Joe Rogan's show. A lot of them were regularly. And these are people that had long, in-depth conversations with Joe Rogan, altering his perspective and the way he speaks about this stuff to this day. And so it shows that there was a broad effort happening to influence culture, not just by Epstein, but people like him. And that's ultimately why I think this was successful, is because it wasn't some conspiracy that was carried out by Epstein, but it was rather sort of a wave that he was riding. And that's why Steve Bannon is there, and Peter Thiel is there, and Elon Musk is there, because all of these guys are riding the same wave to a certain extent. And Joe Rogan is also riding that wave, and in many ways they're kind of running their game through him. So that seems to be what's going on with the Joe Rogan experience, and people are noticing it. So on pretty much the day that these files dropped, Rogan did an episode with a guy named Mike Benz, who's a former State Department guy. He very briefly worked in Trump's first State Department, and then went on to found something called the Foundation for Freedom Online, which is basically like an anti-censorship, pro-free speech thing. But he also has done work with Zionists and pro-Israel groups, which are very anti-free speech, especially online, which leads to some very interesting gems from this guy's past in terms of projects that he's been involved in. So I'll get to that in a second, but here's some very short clips from the interview they did, just to show you what they were talking about on the day these files were released.
That's a very specific illicit desire. to want underage people?
Well,
How do you even find out that someone's into that?
Well, I don't think that the majority or anything close to it of the women were technically. I think it was largely very young, barely legal, so to speak. And I know that there were cases of underage, but I think
most of it was just
very, very young, but not like
20-year-old
not
girls,
like 13
18-year-old girls.
type thing. And then remember, because this is an international enterprise, and many of the clients are like in countries that don't necessarily have the same norms about that that we do. You can very easily see someone getting involved in that just because girls juice deals. And so I don't think that Epstein, I've not seen evidence, and in my view, you don't need any of that to understand the core part of the Epstein story that is relevant to your life today in terms of your own government and the workings of power and corporate finance and the like. But I do think that girls juice deals, and the fact that he had the coolest parties on a private island with the hottest girls is
also
something
brought
that
in
makes
a lot of intellectuals, stimulating conversation, scientists, all these very interesting people. So that was part of the thing, right? That was the draw.
Try hosting a cool party as a guy with a bad ratio, so to speak.
Sausage party.
With a sausage party. And when you develop a reputation for having attractive women at the parties you host, you become an important person to know in the network. Because basically every male has a desire for attractive women, not saying underage, obviously, but that is like a universal biological desire for men to want to be around attractive women.
And what did they do for gay guys?
I have no idea.
It's just crazy that statutory rape is what took it all down, right? Because it's underage hand jobs, right? That's what took it all down.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be what took Jeffrey Epstein down.
Kind of crazy.
Even that has a really interesting geopolitical
So a lot
history.
of people have been calling out that Joe Rogan is kind of downplaying this Epstein stuff, and a lot of people are doing this too. They're feeling the need now to come out and make this distinction about the young girls. Well, there were young girls, but not everybody was into the really young girls. And it's kind of this constant game that we play, mostly with these right-wing types, where it's like this goldfish memory thing, having to constantly reprove things that have already been proven. We already know that the whole point of this Epstein scandal is that, yes, there were some just barely under the legal age girls, but there were also many very young girls. This was a trafficking operation, and even the girls who were just barely above age or just barely below age, they were still trafficked as well and were still victims. And that's the nature of this whole operation. So there's always nuance to everything, but a lot of people are pointing out that Rogan, as we now know, has pretty close proximity to these people in Epstein's circle. And a lot of these people that are being mentioned, especially many times in these files, are people that Joe Rogan knows personally. And there's people like Peter Thiel, there's people like Steven Pinker, whose opinion Joe Rogan takes very seriously. And some of them are people who are very close friends with Epstein, or at least met with him many times, including Elon Musk. And so Joe Rogan's finding himself right in the center of this conspiracy that he's been vaguely talking about for his whole life. But of course, at this point, he can't put his finger on it because his career depends on it. And now he's a part of this whole web. And so that's why people are wanting to hear more from him on this, because now that the dump of files that we got is kind of being sorted through, we can see that Rogan was at least a focal point. And while he may not have been directly implicated in Jeffrey Epstein, and if anything, it seems like Epstein tried to get in touch with him, wanted to be on his show, and Joe Rogan never followed up on it. There's a few emails in this dump of emails that imply that sort of thing, not just with Joe Rogan, but others, like email threads that never go anywhere. So we don't know. Maybe these led to phone conversations, or maybe they met in person. That's the type of stuff that we're not seeing. We're just seeing a very sort of thin paper trail. And so real quick on this guy, Mike Benz, before I move on. This guy basically worked for the State Department, like I said, has his foundation for free speech online, and he got called out by a journalist a few years back because he had like an alt-right persona that he would use online, an anonymous persona that he would use to engage in like right-wing forums and stuff, pushing stuff like white nationalism and the Great Replacement theory. And he came out and said that he was part of a Jewish group that was purposely engaging with those communities in order to try to de-radicalize people. That it essentially was a de-radicalization project focused on getting into those online communities, talking to them. And the way he puts it, although there doesn't seem to be much evidence of this that I could find, I couldn't find anything about this account anywhere other than the article about it. But the way he puts it is that it was this, we post things like that to get people to engage with us so that we can de-radicalize them and point them to the fact that it's not all about the Jews. Now, the thing about that is that this is specifically a guy who is opposed to censorship in online spaces. So I can see how this is a project that people who want online spaces to be open and uncensored, which is exactly the kind of thing that leads to Nazism and bigotry spreading in the way that we've seen like wildfire in America in the past few years. But they feel that the best way to engage with that type of hatred is to try to get involved with people like that, talk to them on their level, I guess, don fake alt-right personas and espouse things about white supremacy to try to get them on your side. Seems like a weird project. Seems like even if you take that at maximum good faith, it's still weird online internet psyop bullshit, which is exactly why you shouldn't trust people like this. And it also, is similar to the type of projects that Epstein was saying he had an interest in. And there's some speculation, no hard proof, but apparently Poll, the politically incorrect board on 4chan, which was created by Moot, that guy met Epstein like a few days before he created that board, and there was a couple other people in that orbit that like introduced the two. So while that may not have been like, hey, my name's Epstein, you should create this political board, I'm gonna bribe you to do it or whatever, but it was amongst conversations that were happening at that time. And that's what I was saying earlier, that this was a lot of people who were trying to push this right-wing reactionary project. They all had varying levels of access. And there was a certain convergence point that happened around the 2016 election where a lot of these influence campaigns kind of got tangled up with each other, harmonized with each other, and created the reactionary movement that is Trump. So Epstein, one thing that we see from this paper trail with Epstein is that he was a part of that whole thing. And we now can see, even if it was just on the outside, and then he kind of became friends with Steve Bannon later, but he just had an interest in pulling strings politically like that. And all of this is aside from what he was trying to do on like the geopolitics side with different leaders and organizing meetings like that. This is purely just his interest in controlling certain online spaces and pushing narratives about genetics and genetic superiority and this thing about like Zionist superiority and that type of eugenics angle about Palestine and that sort of thing. That's the type of shit this guy was pushing. And it all eventually gets laundered through this like huge podcast outlet known as the Joe Rogan Experience and all his friends that go along with it. And the reason why is exactly what we've been criticizing about these guys the whole time, which is that they don't scrutinize this shit and they don't hold people to account based on things they've said in the past. So even something as simple as a con man like Trump coming out and saying, oh, well, we're only going to go after the criminals. Of course we're going to go after the criminals. That's all we care about. He's still saying that, even though we know that's not true, because he's a con man and he's just running his gambit. And it's very interesting that he said, when asked about Joe Rogan, that he thinks what they've done wrong is they failed to sell their policy. He doesn't think they've done anything wrong policy-wise, but he just thinks that they've failed in salesmanship. And it's funny because that's the same thing that Biden said when his presidency was floundering and when it was becoming clear that he would lose the election if he stayed in. That's exactly what he was saying, is that, well, we're just not doing a good job of communicating to the people how well we're doing. So it's this delusional affect that frankly is rearing its head with Trump a lot earlier than it did with Biden. And so, Joe Rogan is ultimately gonna have to say something about the fact that his whole operation is implicated in all this stuff. And people are demanding that of him. People want that because even after this long-winded episode that he did with this guy, Mike Benz, where he basically yaps about foreign policy the whole time, and you see it at the end there where he's saying, even underage hand jobs have an interesting foreign policy history. Like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? And of course, that's what Joe Rogan is belittling the Epstein stuff too. He's saying that's the reason this all fell apart is because of underage hand jobs. And that is not even a fraction of the worst of the credible allegations, let alone the stuff that's out there and anonymous tips and stuff like that. And so even this episode with this guy is confusing to people. People feel like it's not getting to the point. And since then, Joe Rogan has dropped like 4 other episodes. He's dropped a bunch in just the past couple days, which I feel like he doesn't normally do. He normally drops like 2 per week, but he's literally dropped 4 in like the last 3 days. So I think that means that he had a bunch of them banked, because these are just random episodes with random people talking about, whatever their like ultra specific thing is. And so people in the comments of every one of these videos is like, where's the stuff about Epstein? We got questions. Even after, again, he already did a whole episode about it, like the day this shit came out. People still have questions about Joe Rogan and whether or not he has any awareness that he helped launder this to the people, because it's creepy. It has creepy vibes. We're finding out that these guys who were coming on this podcast and talking about these interesting, cool subjects in this sort of out of the ordinary way, we find out that they were part of this sort of cavorting, this creepy group of guys that was pretty explicitly creepy. Like, being in this group is kind of explicitly creepy. And that's the thing with Noam Chomsky too, who was a guy that I had a lot of admiration for. But it's like, how do you have that bad of judgment that you're hanging around this dude as long as you were, past both allegations? After both incidents of Epstein being caught, Noam Chomsky was still hanging around him. That's the case for Bannon too. That's the thing about Bannon, is we need to nail him to that a little bit more. And that's probably another reason that he's coming out and doing his thing about ICE at the polls. We're going to send ICE to the polls, because he is one of the main people that's in these files. And as far as Epstein trying to engineer politics and do all kinds of weird maneuvers and stuff, a lot of those were conversations that he was having with Bannon. That was clearly the type of stuff that they like to talk about, let alone the fact that he, Bannon, and Chomsky were meeting up and having those type of conversations apparently as well. But I think Bannon is trying to distract from that by doing this whole ICE at the polls thing, because the truth is, for him, it doesn't matter, nothing matters. But a lot of the people that follow him are the ones who are on this Epstein shit, who are grossed out by it all, QAnon and different shades of that. And so not only is this like Trump being implicated, names popping up, but Steve Bannon was talking to Epstein about strategy of exonerating himself after these allegations hit the news. Like, that's crazy. And this is the guy that they listen to about like pro-Trump strategy. It's fucking nuts. So, I mean, we have to drive the wedge with this. And Democrats at large are not going to do it. It has to be done on like a more grassroots basis, because people don't want to go near Bannon. People don't want to go near Fuentes, who is now selling like Jeffrey Epstein merch. But this stuff is weird as hell. And there's a lot of people that consider themselves right now that I think are going to find themselves very disgusted with that. And you can see that with Joe Rogan as well. And I don't, necessarily trust the comment sections to be any type of litmus test for where his audience is. He still clearly has a large audience, but the compounding effect of the suspicion that people already had over Peter Thiel and the Trump interview that he did, and the fact that he's now turning on that and he's part of this whole like surveillance world and speaks very favorably about that type of technology, those type of entrepreneurs, if you will. And then there's videos like Elephant Graveyards that just rips into him on the basis of being this sort of like cult, worshiping power type of mentality. And then now this kind of final nail in the coffin comes out, where this Epstein thing is like, even if it's a stretch to say that Joe Rogan is at the center of the Epstein conspiracy, certainly there was a web of people, a web of influence happening, and Joe Rogan amplified so many of them. So many of the people whose names are in this shit were literally amplified by Joe Rogan, most of them with minimal criticism or scrutiny applied. So he does have some questions to answer, and I will be interested to see if he wiggles away from that.
Me too close to, too much to do. The mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity.